Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
The latest assault against the Affordable Care Act has begun. Previously, under Donald Trump, they eliminated the individual mandate, which I know was a controversial portion of the law, but its removal will, in the end, raise prices for people who remain on those plans. They've also allowed plans that don't cover essential benefits to be sold. So now many people will be buying health insurance that will leave them vulnerable to both medical and economic emergencies later on when they actually need the health insurance they think they have. And now it's about to get a whole lot broader and enter into areas that we thought we did not have to worry about. In a brief filed in a Texas federal court and an accompanying letter to the House and Senate leaders of both parties, the Justice Department agrees in large part with 20 Republican-led states that have brought a suit against the ACA. They contend that the ACA provision requiring most Americans to carry health insurance soon will no longer be constitutional, and we know that. And as a result, consumer insurance protections under the law will not be valid either. The 3-page letter from Attorney General Jeff Sessions begin by saying that Justice adopted its position with the approval of the President of the United States. And I've looked into it. This is literally the only thing Jeff Sessions is doing that Trump approves of these days.
Yeah.
But there was a reference there to consumer protections. So what does that actually mean? The most important thing that we're talking about here are the protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Now, if you go back more than a decade to before the ACA, if you had a pre-existing condition, which we know a huge percentage of Americans do, we're gonna break down some of the numbers later on, you could lose your health insurance. You could be denied access to it. Or if something happened to you and you had health insurance, they would deploy their detectives to go through your history, identify that you should have known or reported that you had this, and then your plan would be revoked at that point. One of the things that the ACA did that is good and both sort of universally accepted, 70% of those polled back in June of 2017 supported the protection for people with pre-existing conditions. That was brought on under the ACA. Now, the Trump administration is saying they are not going to defend the ACA, including assaults against that exemption. So in the near future, potentially, we could lose that protection.
So like the lawsuit argues that without the financial penalty for not having insurance, that the law is unconstitutional, which was like the legal logic that John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, used in his argument when he upheld the individual mandate. But the GOP tax bill repealed that aspect of it. So they're essentially playing the dirty games that they always do. They're using the things that they have already done as a reason to screw over Americans, as they tend to do.
And what's incredible is how brazen they are in, taking away these protections, but also just rejecting, historically rejecting portions of the Affordable Care Act that would offer them federal money to expand their state Medicaid programs and offer coverage for the most impoverished people in the country, the most disadvantaged people in the country. So, I mean, this should be unsurprising for anyone who's been paying attention and who has noticed that they are willing to go against the best interests of their constituents just to be greedy or make a political point. But, this, I think, could have some severe ramifications for them politically, because people are going to feel the impact of this unless they are successful in spinning it, which Republicans are very successful in spinning things. They can make it seem as though, oh no, this is a failure of Obamacare, that it's now really affecting you. It has nothing to do with us, and you really need Democrats to fight back, right? So I think that there's a messaging thing. But if they are successful in this, and keep in mind, federal judges do need to make a decision on this, but it is likely that this Republican appointed judge is very likely to vote in favor of what the Republicans want in this suit. We'll see how it all plays out, but we really need fighters in Congress right now. We need Democrats to come forward and make it abundantly clear what's going on and how they're planning on stripping these protections away from Americans who desperately need it.
And I think we also need to call out the fact that it's not an economically intelligent decision,
right?
Which might not also be surprising, but the reality is the math between having a mandate and actually having coverage over pre-existing conditions almost cancels each other out. And so you can actually have both done, which the Affordable Care Act was meant to do, and not really miss a beat. You're dialing back the entire economics of how insurance companies work, the whole benefit of having a larger pool of people paying into other people who are coming into the pool. Ultimately, and the Republicans don't even understand this, that's actually good for insurance companies. They get to have bigger pools. So in effect, they are both screwing the public and screwing the insurance companies, which is a bizarre balancing act.
I mean, the first time this policy was implemented was in the state of Massachusetts under Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is a Republican, we all know this. So this was not some crazy socialist progressive plan. It was actually quite the opposite. And I think that there needed to be a better way to explain why the mandate took place or was implemented in the first place, because I don't think most people understood what it was. It was painted as government overreach and nothing more than that, but in reality, yes, that is what helped fund this program. I wish we didn't have the Affordable Care Act. I wish we had universal health care and something that made a lot more sense than what we currently have. But now, we might not even have the protections under the Affordable Care Act, and that's devastating.
And just to piggyback on top of what you said about this being not economically viable, this throws the markets into even more disarray than it did when there was a legislative battle over the Affordable Care Act just a few months back, because a legal case could take who knows how long. And so insurance companies are actually pretty angry that these Republican states are going forward with this and that the Justice Department is backing those 20 states.
Right, and also to what you just said really quick, the reality is if you're not having enough money coming into the insurance system, which is not a good system, we should have a universal system. We should not have private insurers who actually are the ones deciding what treatments are given to individual people and so forth. But it also means that it opens the door to reducing benefits even further. And so what people think they have, whether they are doing it under the Affordable Care Act or under their own private insurance policies, they will find themselves with less insurance than they are paying for, they think they're paying for.
And this is definitely an indication that there is nothing that is not on the table in terms of being snatched away. I mean, this is the most universally popular part of this, both for Americans at large and Republicans. If you weren't around before the ACA, it was rough times if you were not some perfect like hulk of strength, like perfect physical strength. If you had any sorts of problems, you were probably gonna have financial problems as well, and they are ready to bring us back there. I know some people see any sort of strike against the ACA as, like if like us, you want universal health care, you say, well, what's the difference? We wanna get to universal health care. But the thing is, we don't immediately get to that. And along the way, a lot of people theoretically could end up bankrupt or chronically ill or dead as a result of changes like this. And some people are in a safe enough or healthy enough position that they can look on this and just say, it'll be fine, we'll push past it in a few years, but there's gonna be a lot of people left behind along the way.
May I also,
really fast before we get to that, I wanna go back to that last graphic 21, just to show you again, 59% of Republicans support these protections. And I wanna focus, I mean, that represents millions and millions and millions of Republicans. I wanna focus on one, because there is one prominent Republican who also supported these protections. His name is Donald Trump. And we wanna show you some of the promises that he made over the past few years in relation to this specific part of the law.
Are you going to make sure that people with preconditions are still covered?
Yes, because it happens to be one of the strongest assets. We should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage. Let me just tell you, pre-existing conditions are in the bill. And I just watched another network than yours, and they were saying pre-existing is not covered. Pre-existing conditions are in the bill. And I mandated, I said it has to be.
This notion of pre-existing conditions is obviously of tremendous concern.
Yeah, we're having pre-existing conditions, it's in.
Is it okay then to pass a House bill that may not protect pre-existing conditions because of a state's loophole?
Well, we are protecting pre-existing conditions, and it'll be every bit as good on pre-existing conditions as Obamacare.
So look, his ideology at the best of times is a jumble of like indecipherable complexity. He doesn't even understand it. But on this, he was very clear over and over and over. And the reason he was that clear is because this is an incredibly popular part of the law. So now it is clear, Donald Trump lied to you, because it's not like the GOP in the House gave him a bill that stripped it out and he's gotta sign it. This is his approval to the Justice Department. This is on him specifically. And so if you're a Trump supporter, he lied to you over and over and over. And if you were one of the, let's bring this up, one of the 27% of non-elderly adults who have pre-existing conditions, representing somewhere, I'm bad at math, somewhere between 50 and 100 million Americans theoretically could have pre-existing conditions at some point in their life who could now be thrown off of their health insurance. He lied to you. And if you are not a Trump supporter, please share this portion of the video with them. It might get through to them that he does not have their best interests at heart.
And just really quickly, these Republicans are supposed to be rule of law, right? They are literally violating the rule of law here. The law is very clear, and the highest court in the land ruled on it, and they're trying to chip away at it one at a time. Rule of law is only when they're trying to incarcerate more and more black people for drug offenses. That's when they use
support cops that shoot them when they're unarmed. But one thing that I wanted to add, because it is a big story that keeps coming up over and over again because of gun violence in the country. Let's just point, for the record, and just finalize this. They are disingenuous when it comes to mental health issues. Mental health issues are only used as scapegoats, when there's mass violence or mass shootings, and they do not want to talk about gun control. They do not care about your mental health care. They never have, they never will. If they genuinely cared, they wouldn't fight so aggressively to gut the only protections that we have that offer some coverage for those who suffer from mental health issues. And by the way, the number of people who are now, taking their own lives is increasing considerably. We're going to talk about that later on in the show. And to know that this is all going on and that they use it as a political talking point when it's convenient for them is just disgusting.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos. Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
Donald Trump is off overseas at the G7, and our allies are doing what they can to diffuse this brewing trade war that he's gotten us into. Just to be clear, when I say our allies, I mean most of our allies, not his allies, since he doesn't seem to like most of them very much. In advance of the G7, he tweeted this: looking forward to straightening out unfair trade deals with the G7 countries. If it doesn't happen, we come out even better.
How does that work?
If that's the case, then why are you doing it, you nincompoop? But that's what he's going to say, of course. And he goes there and he punches Macron in the face and he punches Merkel in the face and all of that. There are people there, though, that he does like, or people he'd like to be there. So why don't we turn to one of his first requests at the G7, which you'll see here.
We have a world to run. And in the G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
Some might argue that they're already well represented there, but look, he would like to make it the G8 once again. I would like to just fill out the history of this if you're not familiar with how the numbers got moved around. Russia joined the group in the 1990s after emerging from the wreckage of the Soviet Union, making it the G8. But its armed intervention in neighboring Ukraine in 2014 and seizure of the Crimean Peninsula angered other major powers. The remaining members, led by President Barack Obama, expelled it in a sign of global resolve not to let international borders be redrawn by force. Mr. Trump offered no specific reasoning for why Russia should be let back in, even though it retains control of Crimea and has not adhered to an international agreement to end its intervention in eastern Ukraine. So there's more to what he's doing at the G7, but his first big request is to expand its roster slightly.
So I just wanted to add a little bit more context, and this is actually news that we talked about on yesterday's show. So Putin was recently addressing the people of Russia, and he also was essentially addressing other countries internationally for being allies of the United States. And so he essentially poked fun or taunted US allies for doing business with the United States and said something along the lines of, what did I tell you? You do business with the United States, what are you gonna get? You get these tariffs, which he likened to sanctions. So he's been criticizing the United States pretty aggressively, and to me, what it does is it messages that Trump is the perfect candidate, or the perfect president, I should say, for someone like Putin, who really wants to dominate the world stage and wants to kind of get the upper hand over the United States, right?
It's pretty easy to get the upper hand over Donald Trump.
Exactly right. And now we have Trump saying, like, Russia should be at the table. I don't know why he adds an R at the end of Russia. But anyway.
What's interesting is that, well, first of all, we have imposed sanctions. We are currently in a policy of sanctions by his own administration, by his own Treasury Secretary, who announced this back in April. We have expanded our sanctions against Russia. So he didn't get that memo. Okay, he didn't read it, whatever. I just want to go back to the fact that he was concerned about deals with the G7 countries, because that implies to me that he did not realize that we are technically one of the 7 countries in the G7. Mm-hmm. That's just a math thing, but there's actually a G6, if he's being accurate about the countries with which he is invoking trade wars, which is all of them.
That's right.
The ministers of finance, the treasury secretaries and so forth from the G7 met before this meeting. This is the leaders. Before that, the financial leaders met, and 6 out of 7 of them, the 7th being us, basically were opposed to all of the trade wars that Trump has started, that they have retaliated against, and that will continue to spiral upward. Every single one of them declared in some manner that it feels like the G6 plus 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk more about the odd relationship between us and our allies versus Trump and those who are not our natural allies. But John McCain actually put out a statement about this announcement that Trump put out, and it talks a little bit about that. So I want to read an excerpt from his press release. John McCain said, Vladimir Putin chose to make Russia unworthy of membership in the G8 by invading Ukraine and annexing Crimea. Nothing he has done since then has changed that most obvious fact. Every day, Russian-led separatist forces are killing Ukrainians in the Donbass. Every day, Putin's forces are helping the Assad regime slaughter the Syrian people. And every day, through assassination, cyber attacks, and malign influence, Russia is assaulting democratic institutions all over the world. The president has inexplicably shown our adversaries the deference and esteem that should be reserved for our closest allies. Those nations that share our values and have sacrificed alongside us for decades are being treated with contempt. And it is interesting, really fast. It's interesting that, like, in his talks with Trudeau recently, or Macron, or Merkel, who he doesn't seem to have liked even as much as he liked them, like these people who are natural allies, naturally he goes after and he attacks. The people who are authoritarian leaders around the world, as Bernie Sanders pointed out recently, he just feels this natural kinship for. And you might say, well, they're flattering him. But the thing is, as Anna pointed out, I mean, Russia was recently sort of taunting Trump over his trade problems with his allies. And that leads to him wanting them to join the G7 to make it the G8. But when he just had a contentious talk with Macron over trade, he got pissed at him. When he talked with Trudeau and he didn't like the criticism, he got pissed at him. So why is it that with our allies, when they criticism, he reacts negatively, but when it's authoritarian rulers, he's fine with it?
Maybe he just has some sort of affection for them, but I think that there might be more at play. And also, considering the fact that he's in the middle of this investigation, which he can't stop himself from tweeting about, it's probably not a great idea. As Emma said during the break, it's not a good idea for you to, out of nowhere, mention that Russia should be involved, in this group of allies, that it should be the G8 again. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, he doesn't really have the mental block to know, wait, they're in the news cycle, they're talking about how I'm in Putin's back pocket. Maybe I shouldn't, out of nowhere, unprompted, with no policy position behind it, say that Russia should be back into the G8, make it the G8 again. But just a side note about John McCain, I wish that he would hold the United States to the same standard that he holds other countries to. He's not making the same argument that the United States should be expelled from the G7 because we are currently helping the Saudi blockade in Yemen, et cetera. So I just want to take John McCain's comments with a grain of salt, because often it's just ramping us up towards more war, more aggression, et cetera. And he often doesn't have policy behind it. He likes to criticize Donald Trump in public and then vote for him in private.
It's just back to the G8 and the whole Russia versus the G6, the rest of our allies. I mean, to your question, maybe the fact is that we actually have trade agreements with all of these nations, in addition to being part of the full G7 bloc. Yeah. We actually have sanctions against Russia.
That's right.
So it's a very bizarre sort of anti-Machiavellian. It's very strange.
And also, I mean, if he had a reason, if he could actually point to how this would benefit the American people, then okay. But these, the way that we're treating our allies and the tariffs on aluminum and steel are actually going to negatively impact employers, more importantly, employees and consumers in the United States. So I don't understand why he's doing this with, again, our longest serving allies. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Even if you're not remotely interested in the Russia angle of this, and you think that countries that invade and seize territory should be allowed in with no conditions on them, remember that we're talking about him going there, punching our allies in the face, and we are going to lose hundreds of thousands, if not potentially millions, of jobs as a result of it.
Right. What is it a good idea to get involved in a trade war with Europe? What president would think that, except for Trump?
Yeah. Right, well, the last time that happened, we had a Great Depression throughout the world. The last time we had an isolationist policy was in the 1920s, in the wake of World War I, and that ultimately unleashed a global depression and World War II. Yeah.
I'm sure
so
Trump
that's
knows
what
that.
happened.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm sure
he studied that.
Yeah.
He studied that.
He's a well-versed historian, the best historian.
And he can count.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos. Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
Donald Trump's conspiracy theories are now determining US policy in a number of different areas, ranging from climate change to asbestos. In his 1997 book, The Art of the Comeback, Trump argued that the association of the chemical with health risks was part of a mob-created conspiracy. He said, "I believe that the movement against asbestos was led by the mob because it was often mob-related companies that would do the asbestos removal. Great pressure was put on politicians, and as usual, the politicians relented." He, by the way, has also said that it is 100% safe, asbestos. You shouldn't worry about it. And so that was just his belief, though. What do we care about that? Well, now we know that the EPA is not going to consider the health risks and impact of asbestos already in the environment when evaluating the dangers associated with the chemical compound, according to Scott Pruitt. That was announced last week, just revealed a day or two ago. That means asbestos used in tiles, piping, and adhesives throughout homes and businesses in the United States will remain largely unchecked and unaccounted for, which again, you don't have to worry about because it is 100% safe, as Trump said, which will be news to the nearly 15,000 Americans who die each year from asbestos-related diseases.
And because he's a chemist.
He's the chemist as well, an amateur chemist.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
since it's safe, I would like to use asbestos, ridden materials in any dwelling that Trump ever exists in. Why don't we, change the piping and the tile? Let's do some renovations.
He should put it in
the
his
Oval
McDonald's.
Office.
Yeah, see how he likes the taste.
So we knew, at least at the Young Turks, we knew that the Trump administration would be terrible, but it's kind of amazing how many things come up that we didn't even see coming. Like terrible, just terrible actions by the EPA that we didn't even consider. Like asbestos is just, it's been widely known for a while now to cause serious health issues, respiratory issues, which is why, you see those commercials on every television show, featuring lawyers who want to do business or help people who have suffered from this. And to know that we're gonna go back in time on this issue. Something this ridiculous is devastating, and it's going to continue happening. Things that you least expect are going to now, lack oversight by the EPA, the very government organization that's supposed to protect us.
Right, and also the fact that these people, these 15,000 Americans that die each year from asbestos-related poisoning, are probably Republicans and Democrats. This is not this is not something that just applies to one group of the voter base. I mean, this is something that applies to whoever has been contaminated, and he isn't a chemist. And Scott Pruitt, who is still trying to, who spent $120,000 of our money to go to Italy and camp out at the Vatican,
right?
Shouldn't be the person, first of all, running the EPA, but also not protecting us. Forget not protecting the EPA, which he doesn't do very well, but not protecting all kinds of Americans.
Well, this is the same EPA that says the Clean Air and Water Act right now, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Acts are fine. Have you seen Flint, Michigan? I don't know. They still don't have clean water there. Have you seen what's happening in Chicago where they found lead in the water? And lead is just the beginning of what's wrong with our water and our air. I mean, the respiratory problems from asbestos aren't the only I can't say the word. Can you help me?
That's the effect of asbestos on your body. Respiratory.
That's right, respiratory.
And it is going to get worse thanks to this. To put it in perspective, by the way, the 15,000 Americans that die every year, that is roughly 5 9/11s every single year. Hell, it's even 3 Hurricane Marias in Puerto Rico every single year. And we're just gonna allow that to continue. We're not gonna do anything about it because we don't want the mob to benefit too much. I hope that this isn't just his conspiratorial thinking, that he gets an idea in his head and he doesn't actually look for data in regard to it. I hope that it is simply that he built shoddy real estate and he didn't want to do what is necessary to clean out asbestos.
Oh my God,
I assume that that's probably what it is.
That is a great point.
Don't trust a real estate guy on something that's all up in their real estate. But look, Linda Reinstein, who lost her husband to this chemical, is is president of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, and responded to this news saying, if you don't evaluate the dangerous legacy of asbestos, you don't know how much contamination still exists in the United States. We know it's in our homes, schools, workplace, and environment, but the average American can't identify and evaluate the risk. We've taken risk evaluation off the table. And I will say this. We have been covering constantly the environmental regulations that have been being reversed under Donald Trump. And that might sound bad, but there is a silver lining, because I had not actually known how many good moves Obama made on the environment. They've all been reversed now, but he apparently actually did quite a bit throughout the course of his presidency.
He did. He was terrible at taking credit for those things, or at least, again, it goes back to the failure of democratic messaging, right? Where when they're actually right on something or when they actually accomplish something, they somehow allow Republicans to take control of the narrative and dictate whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. Of course, when Democrats accomplish something, Republicans will market it as something that's terrible, and Democrats don't fight back. So you're right, there were so many environmental policies under the Obama administration that I was completely unaware of. And he never talked about those things.
It was by design because he was afraid to be called anti-industry and anti-capitalist. So he did everything that he did that was really good was usually behind the scenes, because it's the Democratic Party operates out of fear. Oftentimes. And that's what's unfortunate about what he did, because if he was more public about it and controlled the messaging like Anna just said, a majority of the American people don't want asbestos in their air, and they want the environment to be clean. They want to be able to turn on their tap and know that the water that's coming out is healthy for them. So if he was able to control that, then Trump wouldn't be able to so easily do what he's doing now, and wouldn't put such an awful individual, the worst cabinet member like Scott Pruitt in the EPA.
I wonder if exposure to asbestos counts as a pre-existing condition. I
love that you mentioned that, because everything comes together. You know, they're gutting the Affordable Care Act. You have 20 Republican-led states that are fighting tooth and nail to do away with protections that would prevent insurance companies from dropping you from their programs or their coverage.
So I have an example, though, of those protections that are being taken away. And actually, another one of the moves that Obama made that I had not actually known about, this is in the process of being reversed. Under a law passed by Congress during the final year of the Obama administration, the EPA was required for the first time to evaluate hundreds of potentially toxic chemicals and determine if they should face new restrictions or even be removed from the market. That was the plan. As it moves forward, reviewing the first batch of 10 chemicals, the EPA has, in most cases, decided to exclude from its calculations any potential exposure caused by the substance's presence in the air, the ground, or the water. I mean, how would a chemical get into any of those? The agency will focus on possible harm caused by direct contact with a chemical in the workplace or elsewhere. So let's give you an example of one of those. Under the approach, the EPA will examine what harm can be caused to anyone directly exposed to perchloroethylene, a dry cleaning solvent and metal degreaser designated by the EPA as a likely carcinogen during manufacturing or when using it in dry cleaning, carpet cleaning, or handling certain ink removal products. But the agency will not focus on exposures that occur from traces of the chemical found in drinking water in 44 states as a result of improper disposal over decades, which is certainly nice if you produce that chemical or if you might have to foot the bill for removal of it or filtering of it from our water supply. So look, it's not to say that they're not going to protect you from the harmful effects of chemicals, so long as, like in the beginning of a Batman movie, you fall over a railing into a big vat of it. They will protect you from that sort of contact.
The Joker would be covered under
the
this.
Joker would be covered, but if there are chemicals in our water, which we know there are any number of them, the EPA is not concerned about that.
And that just, again, pushes the problem of bad health, of bad environmental practices into the future. It won't change the impact of asbestos. It's not going to change the impact of people with pre-existing conditions who might have been exposed to asbestos or whatever the combinations are of coming into the system. It increases the cost in the future. That cost could happen under Trump, it could happen under another Republican administration, it could happen under a Democratic administration. So though perhaps things weren't touted sort of under Obama that might have actually been helpful, like the Paris Accord more so. There is opportunity right now to talk about this because, again, it is a bipartisan issue in terms of the voter.
And just to show how far we've come or how much we've regressed, the Republican Party, the asbestos was proposed to be banned under a Republican president in 1989. And now they're saying, go ahead. We don't care about those health effects. The Republican the EPA was a Richard Nixon creation.
Right.
And now we have someone that's the head of the EPA who's working to dismantle it every single day.
And the president who calls it 100% safe.
Yes.
Applied right.
Yes, yeah, the mob's not safe, but asbestos is. And just again, I hate to, you don't want to beat a dead horse or a dead Trump voter, but like you thought that this was the guy that's going to get in there and look out for you, that the politicians that had been there before weren't, and in many ways they weren't, but neither is he. Like, did you vote for him so he could go to Washington and stop chemicals from being taken out of our water or keep the asbestos in your home? Is that what you sent him there to do? Did he drain the swamp just to find that all that's left now is asbestos and metal degreaser? But that's what you get. So just a reminder for the next time around.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.
A dreamer who had been in the country since he was 3 years old had chosen to be deported rather than forced to be deported after he had some minor convictions for misdemeanors involving driving under the influence. Now, unfortunately, shortly after he left the country and went back to Mexico, he was murdered. And some believe that he was murdered by cartels because of the drug violence in Mexico. Manuel Antonio Cano Pacheco was scheduled to graduate from high school last month, but died just after being deported by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So let me just explain how this all happened. He had been in the country since he was 3 years old. He had protection as a dreamer. However, after he was caught, I don't know if he was drinking, but he was driving under the influence, a judge had decided to take that protection away from him, and he had an option. He could either be forced to leave the country, regular deportation, or he could agree on his own, volunteer to leave the country. And the reason why he chose that option is because he would have the ability to come back as a visitor in the future. Now, unfortunately, again, after he left, shortly after he was murdered, according to reports, his throat was slit. That was the way that he was murdered. He had a 1-year-old child here in the United States, and apparently he had a full scholarship to a college. So he was battling with depression based on what his family is telling reporters. His father had been imprisoned for drug use, and that kind of led to a downward spiral in his own personal life, and unfortunately, it ended in a very tragic way.
So when you say when it is said in reports that he chose to leave, to be deported, the choice was between you have to leave and you have to leave, but you can come back.
Right.
So that was not the choice to say, you know what, it seems like it's my decision to do this. No, that was the version of the punishment of you had a DUI, you need to go, that he chose, because obviously he would choose that between that and the alternative. But when you bring up depression, we're just talking about mental illness. A dreamer doesn't get to have depression in the eyes of a conservative media or conservative. He doesn't get to.
Right.
He is a criminal. He is painted as such, and he is treated as such. And you need look no further than the Brock Turner case, was his name, the Stanford swimmer.
Right.
Yeah.
He was going through some stuff. It might have a negative effect on him, so we will go easy on him because he's a swimmer from Stanford. That is the disparity that is so clear, so prevalent in stories like this, and it's utterly unjust.
I just want to quickly remind people who might have forgotten about that story. He was caught raping someone who was unconscious behind a dumpster.
Yeah.
And the judge was incredibly lenient, gave him a 6-month sentence, 3 of which he actually served.
Judge got recalled.
He did get recalled, which was some good news this week.
And you know what? And to tie those two things in together, if you don't think that those local elections matter, and when it comes to these cases, this kind of stuff, these judges, the people who are in office that affect you locally, that's when you really have to use your power to get those people out. Just like that judge is gone, the DA in Florida that was associated with the Trayvon Martin case, gone, because the people in the community chose to go out and vote. Quite honestly, I'm an anchor baby. My father is an immigrant that has been deported 3 times back to the Dominican Republic. He's not in the United States. When I think about these stories, I think about the privilege that I had to be born here, because he was only 3. So it's not like he came here 6 months ago, but the demonization of immigrants, I know those Bush girls were drunk and doing drugs and alcohol, and people, stigmatize these young people. I'm just so tired of the war on people who look like me and people who come here to make a difference, going on a scholarship to go to college, not a gang member, not participating in crime, here trying to do something, give a better life to his own child, and yet you go on Twitter and the justification for this, he was a criminal, and we want our country back. And I'm so tired of hearing people who stole this country saying that this is our country. I've had it up to here.
Well, this is white supremacy at its best, and white privilege. That's very obvious. I mean, he's painted out, just recently he called immigrants, 45, called immigrants animals. And if this poor child, the only thing he did wrong was to drink under the influence, and he gets a criminal record, and the option is basically leave or leave. And he left, and then really we've not really solved any problems, because what we really have to play with here is that white supremacy still rules, and 45 is still busy coddling every single white supremacist out there while they're busy, homegrown mass shooters are killing children in schools and in churches. And at the same time, we've got all this attention going towards ICE and immigrants. And I think it's not in alignment with what apparently America is all about. And yet it's what we seem to be focused on continuously. And again, more smoke screens and more smoke screens while 45 gets to do whatever he wants in the background and busts out with some new policy.
And for anyone who thinks, okay, well, he did break the law, so that's it. He needs to be deported. Can you at least acknowledge that those who seek asylum at the border are seeking asylum for legitimate purposes because that violence in their countries, which by the way is perpetuated by our policies, is real, and they're afraid and they want to protect themselves and their families. And how do we respond to them? We rip their children away from them, take their children to detention centers or shelters in different states, and then spend US tax dollars to prosecute those very people who are seeking asylum. That's what's happening in the country right now. There was a report right before we went to air about how immigrants are now being put in federal prisons because these detention centers are too full. These private prisons are too full. Federal prisons are used for the most violent criminals imaginable, people who have been convicted of violent crimes. And right now we are housing undocumented immigrants there because we don't want to give them asylum, we don't want to protect them. I mean, it's one thing to not want to allow them in the country, which I disagree with, but why not just send them away? Why would we need to prosecute them? Why would we take their children away and keep them in detention for who knows how long? Sometimes it's an indefinite period of time. Yep. I mean, it's crazy.
Didn't Coretta Scott King try to warn y'all about Jeff Sessions? Didn't she say, wasn't it her who, Coretta Scott King spoke out about him when she was alive back in the day?
I have family that's worked in politics in Alabama. They knew about Jeff Sessions.
No, but what I'm saying, they were, and when he was running, what was the name of the black woman that was like, do not. You guys got to vote against him.
Yes.
You got to make sure. And then Donald Trump is like, the black people, let's get him.
Jeff Sessions was the first one to say, like, Trump seems like a good guy. I'm going to get out in front of him. I'm going to be the first idiot in line there. He was the first, and he's the worst. The worst went first.
Yeah, and I have to be honest, I kind of enjoy every time Trump tears them apart on Twitter. Even though he tears them apart for all the wrong reasons, I do enjoy it because he deserves it.
Yeah,
he's not a good person. I mean, look, Trump has he's filling the swamp. I mean, like the swamp has not been emptied. He has picked the worst people, like Scott Pruitt to head the EPA, Jeff Sessions to head the Justice Department as Attorney General. It couldn't get worse. And
it just feels like he's picking members of a fan club. You know, you like me? You like me? Okay, sure, you can come in.
Right.
So yeah, it's baseless.
An elementary school in Massachusetts is getting quite a bit of attention after parents who were thinking about sending their child there came across a nursery rhyme that would prepare kindergartners for a potential lockdown in response to a shooter. So I'm gonna show you the note that was tweeted by these parents, and it went viral. Now, for those of you who might not be able to read it, it says, lockdown, lock the door, shut the lights off, say no more, go behind the desk and hide, wait until it's safe inside, lockdown, it's all done, now it's time to have some fun. So again, this was posted in a kindergarten class, and I completely understand why the school, why the teachers would want to do it. This is obviously a serious problem, and how do you communicate this problem, or how do you prepare kindergartners for a potential shooter? But it is a pretty devastating commentary on the state of the country, how schools are dealing and coping with a very real problem. And by the way, the lack of action on a federal level. Betsy DeVos is now the head of a commission that is supposed to respond to these mass shootings. And when asked by Senator Patrick Leahy, will you be looking into the issue of guns? She specifically said with a big smile on her face that they will not address guns.
Of course.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because this is what nursery rhymes are for. Traditionally, in history.
Yes.
Ring Around the Rosie is about the plague. It is about how to diagnose the symptoms of the plague. Ring around the rosy, you got red ring, pocket full of posy, those are the buboes and the bubonic plague. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down, we die.
Yeah.
That's it. Jack and Jill, and just on their face, these nursery rhymes are terrifying.
Yeah.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to get a pail of water. Then they fall down the hill and they die. Like, it is weird.
Rockabye baby.
Yes.
When the bow breaks.
Haunts me. apparently.
Oh wow! I never really
cradle
thought.
will
I've never
fall.
done an analysis on these nursery rhymes.
The worst.
Well, as a parent, you're like, what am I singing to my baby? Like, the baby.
First of all, it's like between that and Disney movies. Every mother trying to kill, stepmother trying to kill a child, and you know, dead somebody, and yeah.
Did you see that the Beauty and the Beast and its pro-bestiality message?
Oh, yeah.
Interspecies mating is great.
But you know what?
Frozen cocaine's coming out of her hands.
Frozen cocaine.
You're insane.
But you
I'm the ice queen.
message, you
I'm the
know?
ice queen.
You know, don't judge a book by its
cocaine.
cover. There might be real beauty inside.
That is beautiful. But listen, you know what? People, I went online and I looked at some of the responses to this. You know, when I think about it, I think about Sandy Hook. Those little kids did not have access to anything that was preparing them for murder, because they were not prepared, because they shouldn't have to be. But when I saw all the outrage about these nursery rhymes, you know what? Why don't you be outraged about these homegrown terrorists that are the reason why these children, why we've had to update the nursery rhymes to address mass shootings, which are now a reality that we all have to deal with. As a grown-up, I go into a movie theater. I was in the movie theater nervous because I thought a guy next to me, I was profiling a white dude sitting next to me. I thought he had a gun. I was like, he's by himself.
I can't do movie theaters anymore either.
It makes me nervous. So imagine a 5-year-old not having the basic information about, and unfortunately, this is how you program children through music, you know, and how you program them to learn things that, you know, you got to get them programmed to understand what they are supposed to do if somebody goes in their classroom with a gun. Well, we got to stop. We got to stop coddling these murderers.
It's funny because I oftentimes will do like a comparative analysis of how Americans prepare children for you know, pretty devastating things, adult problems and difficult concepts to understand. And then I think about like how my parents prepared me for things, or how Armenian parents traditionally will prepare their parents.
Yes.
No. Okay, Anahit, listen. People come to school, they have gun, they try to kill you. So I give you gun, and no. But you know, my mom never tried to like rhyme or do something cutesy with anything. If bully come to you, you punch him in the face. You know, and it's like it's very different. And the thing is, the way that I think American culture handles these situations, it almost kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's whitewashing is not the right term, but it makes a very serious issue seem less serious. That's what I mean to say.
So when we both grew up in the Los Angeles area, and we had the terrifying experience of an earthquake is the ground which you rely on to be a solid thing, just suddenly effing with you. Shaking all around. And so the way they prepared us, we had drills, of course, but they also had the shaky quakey bus, which was a hydraulically fitted van that parks at your school, and it's room B goes down. It's time for your shaky squeaky bus. And Yogi Bear is like, hey, boo-boo, what do you do in case of an emergency?
Goodness.
And they have shells.
Only in America,
yeah,
honestly.
And it's like this. The hydraulics shake, and this is a 5-point earthquake. Here's a 6-point earthquake. But what else? I mean, what else are you supposed to do?
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
This is true. There isn't really much you can do. I mean, this is Donald Trump's America, isn't it? So that's what we're looking at right now.
It was also Obama's America too, though.
This is
And it gets worse every year. There's no question about that. It happens more often now that we're, mass shooters know. There's nothing's going to be done about this. They have mental health issues themselves, which, by the way, I do believe needs to be addressed. But it's not just mental health issues; it's also guns. I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you. But.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think we put it down to mental health issues, or just, if it's a school, yes, it's, I want to kill a bunch of kids. If it's the church that where a bunch of, people of color, black people got shot, it was racism. So, and they always put it down to mental health. When it's a white guy, it's mental health.
Right.
When it's a black guy or a brown guy, is a totally different scene. I mean, even down to the way that there was recently that cop that drove into the guy who was running off, the black guy that was running off.
Georgia.
Yeah, that's what happened the day before yesterday or something like that. And even there, you know, that was again just profiling this poor black boy. If it had been then that white cop would never have got another job. If he'd been black. So that again, like look at the situations and how they play out. It's just the same.
The next county over.
He did. Yeah.
And
because he's a nice boy and we knew him when he was a little boy. I mean, like, what does that even mean?
Right.
You know, there's a ton of people I know when they were little, and now I know them now. It's like I wouldn't have anything to do with them. So.
What did that do knowing them as a kid?
I know. I knew him as a kid. He's lovely.
Somebody knew Jeffrey Dahmer as a kid. Right? Somebody knew Ted Bundy as a kid.
And then specifically to the issue of guns in school, Nancy DeVos, did you see that? There was a moment when Nancy DeVos went in a hearing before Senator Leahy, and Leahy was like, so Trump created a task force to study safety in schools, and Leahy's like, so are you gonna study guns as it relates to safety in schools? And she just balked. She's like, oh, no, we're not going, we'll leave the door open. We're not, we blah, blah, blah.
Well,
won't even commit to studying the effects of guns on school safety.
By the way, that commission was created immediately after the shooting in Parkland, Florida.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was created in response to a shooting, and they're refusing to even consider the issue of guns. And it might have something to do with the fact that Betsy DeVos herself is invested in a company that makes parts for military weaponry, i.e. guns, right? And by the way, you were incorrect about one thing. As she was answering, she didn't have a serious look on her face. She had a smile as she's telling Leahy, no, we will not be looking at the issue of guns. She thinks that smiling while she's saying something incredibly stupid somehow masks the stupidity of her statement. I mean, it's unbelievable. But of course they're not gonna do something about it. And it will continue to be an issue. We need to get more active politically.
Yes.
And that is really the only hope that we have. Please get involved in your local elections. Be involved in the general election as well. But more importantly, the primaries matter. They matter a lot.
Yeah.
And don't leave it to the last minute where you do have an option between the lesser of two evils.